Chapter 1. Ice crunched under my boots. Blood stained the pristine snow. I didn't feel the biting cold anymore, just the phantom, burning ache of my old scars. Have you ever looked in a mirror and absolutely hated the monster staring back at you? I do. Every single day. I am Kaelen Frost, the scarred alpha of the northern wastes, a killer, a shield. Without warning, the southern scout lunged from the shadows. He held a glass vial of dark poison directly over the village water well. Instead, my claws tore through his chest before he could drop it. In that moment, a sickening crunch echoed loudly through the blizzard. He dropped hard onto the frozen earth. Because I had to protect my surviving people, I didn't hesitate. I never hesitate. Still, the foul stench of southern magic clung to his clothes. Why were they so far north? The usurpers usually stayed in their warm, comfortable palaces. Truth be told, this felt wrong. Very, very wrong. I wiped the dark blood from my frozen face. My breath plumed in the freezing air. The wind howled, a lonely, bitter sound. It sounded exactly like my own crying wolf. Moments later, I knelt beside the dead body. My icy, trembling fingers dug through his fur-lined pockets. What followed was a discovery that made my blood run absolutely cold. A box. Small. Wrapped in black velvet. Even so, it smelled strongly of death. As the wind shifted, I popped the tiny lid open. Inside sat a pristine, wax-sealed paper decree. The royal, arrogant stamp of the South gleamed brightly in the pale moonlight. And just like that, everything changed. I ripped the heavy seal. My eyes scanned the elegant, looping ink. A tribute bride. Not only that, they were sending her here. To me. To my frozen, brutal fortress. To make things worse, she was supposedly meant to be a peace offering. Yet, we all knew the dark truth. Because the Southern Alpha was a lying snake, this girl was a spy. Or bait. Or a fragile glass doll sent to die in my frozen monster's den. Because my soul was broken, I couldn't protect a mate. I lost half my pack in the last terrible massacre. That dark day, fire rained from the sky. My friends burned, my family screamed. I completely failed them. I carry those horrific, jagged burns across my back as a permanent reminder. I don't deserve love. I don't deserve peace. I only deserve this endless, freezing war. Because of that, I violently crumpled the decree in my bloody fist. I wouldn't play their sick game. On the other hand, if I flatly rejected the bride, it meant all-out bloody war. My pack was simply too weak for a full-scale siege right now. So, I had to take her. I had to let the enemy into my sacred home. While the forest held its breath, I stood up tall. The heavy snow began to bury the dead scout. By the time the storm passed, he would be gone forever. But the true threat wasn't. The threat was coming wrapped in a velvet box. Deep down, I knew the terrible truth. This was a death sentence. With every step I took back toward the keep, my dread multiplied. I would lock her safely in the highest tower. I would keep her completely isolated. I had to do it. Because if I got close, my ruined, monstrous soul would surely break her. In the span of a breath, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My inner wolf clawed viciously at my ribs. Growl. He hated this. He wanted southern blood, not a fragile bride. What's worse, the sickly scent of the velvet box clung to my skin. Cloying, sickly sweet. A southern scent that did not belong in my harsh, brutal world. I stared at the dark, jagged peaks of my home in the distance. The Obsidian Keep, my sanctuary, my lonely prison. Soon it would be her cage, too. I just had to survive this long enough to send her back alive. The ice storm worsened, perfectly masking the sound of my heavy, reluctant footsteps heading home. Chapter 2. The heavy iron doors of the Obsidian Keep slammed shut loudly, locking the violent blizzard outside. Eventually, the bone-chilling cold faded away. Warmth from the deep geothermal vents seeped up into the ancient stone. But then, A harsh, wet cough echoed through the grand, empty hall. Without thinking, I quickly crossed the large room. Old Silas leaned heavily against a stone pillar, gasping for air. His frail, tired chest heaved. I placed a gentle, careful hand on his trembling shoulder. In the quiet that followed, I handed him a heavy clay mug of bitter, steaming root tea. Because my pack was my only family, I would do anything for them, even pour tea like a servant. Silas drank slowly, his breathing slowly steadying. He looked up at my deeply scarred face, his cloudy eyes full of pity. I absolutely hated that pity. Meanwhile, my war council waited anxiously by the great roaring hearth. Next, I tossed the crumpled decree onto the massive wooden table. The velvet box landed with a soft, ominous thud. "A bride," I growled, my voice scraping like sharp stones. As the silence stretched, my general stared blankly at the paper. No matter how hard I tried to hide it, my large hands shook slightly. Not from the cold, from raw, simmering panic. What if she sees my face and screams? "They want to openly mock us," my lead warrior Thorn spat angrily. "Send her severed head back in that same box." Rather, I shook my head firmly. "No, that starts a war we cannot possibly win today." At the same time, my frantic mind raced. I paced the hard stone floor, like a trapped beast, like a cornered predator, like a monster waiting for the slaughter. Because we were slowly recovering, we desperately needed time. We needed a solid strategy. We didn't need a spoiled southern princess demanding warm silks and sweet honey. Truth be told, I secretly planned to ignore her entirely. I would give her a cold, drafty room. I would leave her heavily guarded. I would never let her see the real broken me. I vividly remembered the last time a fancy southern diplomat came here. He took one look at my ruined face and threw up on my boots. I wouldn't let this new girl look at me like that. With every heartbeat, the heavy tension in the room thickened. As the fire bloomed beneath the stone floor, warming the keep, my blood felt exactly like ice. I aggressively pulled a large, worn map across the table. "We lock her securely in the guest tower," I commanded loudly. "We double the outer border patrols. We treat her exactly like a prisoner of war, just a very comfortable one." As if fate demanded it, the keep's massive warning horns suddenly blasted. A beat later, the deafening sound vibrated strongly through my thick boots. B-brrm! Long, deep, terrifyingly urgent. Between one breath and the next, Thorn rushed to the high glass window. He frantically wiped the thick frost from the glass. "Alpha," he whispered. His tough voice actually trembled. Before either could speak, I quickly joined him. In that moment, my stomach dropped to the floor. A massive, winding line of black carriages crawled slowly up the steep mountain path. Southern banners snapped violently in the bitter wind. To make things worse, they were 3 whole weeks early. And just like that, everything changed. My careful plans crumbled into useless ash. My safe sanctuary was completely breached. They were already standing at my gates. The unwanted bride was here. My enemy was now inside my protective walls. The heavy wooden gates groaned in loud protest as the guards prepared to open them, loudly signaling the sudden end of my isolated peace. Chapter 3. The massive iron gates shrieked open. Immediately, the freezing wind howled violently into the courtyard, bringing the foul stench of southern horses and perfumed leather. I stood incredibly rigid on the upper stone steps. Under the weight of my stare, the armed southern guards visibly flinched. Good. I wrapped my heavy fur cloak much tighter, hiding my badly scarred shoulder, but I left my ruined face fully exposed. I wanted her terrified. I needed her to hate me so she would keep her distance. Moments later, the lead black carriage jerked to a sudden halt. The wooden door swung open with a loud, grating creak. As the sky darkened with heavy, threatening snow clouds, a small, cloaked figure stepped carefully out into the biting cold. Lyra. Before she could move toward the icy steps, she kept her hooded head bowed, meek, invisible. She wore simple, cheap wool, definitely not the expensive silk of a royal tribute. On the other hand, the exact way she held herself. It wasn't fear. It was tight discipline. Because I had barely survived a brutal massacre, I recognized the stiff posture of a true survivor. While her pulse raced, I could hear it rapidly beating from 20 yards away, a frantic rabbit's heartbeat. She didn't stumble once. As the wind shifted, it hit me hard. Without warning, a powerful scent punched straight through the falling snow. Not cheap perfume, not sweaty fear. It was fresh rain on hot summer stones, wild, sweet blackberries. And underneath it, raw power. Suffocating, tightly dormant power. It was locked securely away, buried very deep, but it was absolutely there. My inner wolf slammed violently against my ribs. Mine. As my wolf stirred, a ragged, hungry gasp tore painfully from my throat. With every step she took up the slippery, icy stairs, the air completely vanished from my lungs. In the span of a breath, my terrifying fake warlord persona completely shattered. I didn't know what scared me more, the dangerous invading army standing at my gates, or the tiny, quiet woman walking up my front steps. As if pulled by a string, she finally lifted her small head. The moment our eyes locked, the whole world stopped spinning. Her wide eyes were a piercing, shattered silver color. They held so much deep pain, so much hidden, silent grief. They held my bloody past. They held my painful present. They held my terrifying future. As the bond pulsed, a massive physical shockwave ripped straight through my chest. Crack. It felt exactly like a hot iron branding my dark soul. I felt it, clear as day. The ancient mating bond. The sacred, impossible magic tether linking my mangled soul directly to hers. Her world tilted. Or maybe it was just mine. She stumbled very slightly on the very top step. Before the words left her lips, she let out a tiny, stifled whimper. Her cold hand twitched quickly toward her chest, right over her beating heart. She totally felt it, too. Between us, something cracked. The icy, thick wall I had carefully built around my heart for 10 long years splintered into a million tiny pieces. Which meant she wasn't just a simple spy. She wasn't just a political tribute. She was my true, fated mate. That's why her sweet scent was driving me totally insane. Because the cruel universe was playing a sick, twisted joke on me. It actually gave a broken, monstrous killer a fragile, beautifully perfect mate. As if the forest watched, we stood totally frozen in the deep snow. She stared directly at my hideous, jagged scars. I waited tensely for the obvious disgust. I waited for her to run screaming. Instead, she didn't even blink. As the silence roared loudly in my ears, the heavy snowfall slowly blanketed the freezing space between us, securely sealing our terrifying new reality. Chapter 4. What followed was the absolute quietest, deadliest feast in Northern history. The massive dining hall smelled richly of roasted boar and thick pine smoke. Yet the food tasted exactly like bitter ash in my mouth. I sat stiffly at the very head of the long, dark wooden table. Because I was utterly terrified of my own mating bond, I placed Lyra at the absolute farthest end of the room. In fact, she looked incredibly tiny down there. A fragile white dove dropped right into a den of scarred, angry wolves. Her plate remained completely full. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. She didn't speak. Have you ever seen someone try to shrink themselves into nothing? It hurts to watch. It truly does. Meanwhile, my warriors drank heavily, glaring angrily at her southern wool cloak. To make things worse, Bram had consumed way too much fermented honey wine. Bram lost his entire family in the southern fire attacks 5 years ago. Because grief makes good men do stupid things, he suddenly slammed his heavy metal cup down. Bam. Without warning, he stood up unsteadily. He pointed a thick, dirty finger straight at Lyra. "You smell like southern garbage!" Bram spat loudly, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Your people burned my pups. You should be sleeping in the frozen mud with the pigs." As the silence roared, my blood boiled instantly. A fierce, protective growl rose in my throat. Grrrl, my inner wolf wanted to rip Bram's head completely off. How dare he speak to our mate that way? I gripped the wooden arms of my chair so hard the thick wood actually splintered. snap. Before I could move to punish him, I watched Lyra carefully. Despite that horrible insult, she didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She didn't break. Instead, she slowly raised her chin. Her shattered silver eyes met Bram's drunken stare with a terrifying blank calm. She simply accepted the verbal beating. Truth be told, her quiet strength shocked me completely. I remembered my own little brother, crying loudly during his first real scuffle, needing me to save him. But Lyra? She didn't ask for a savior. She was deeply used to cruel monsters, which meant she was hiding a massive secret. Why did the Southern Guards look so incredibly relieved to leave her behind earlier today? That question burned a hot hole in my brain. As the tension broke, I slammed my fist onto the table. "Enough!" I roared. "Get out, Bram! Now!" Without another word, the drunk warrior stumbled away into the dark. As if the world narrowed, I stared down the long table at my silent bride. Our eyes met briefly through the flickering candlelight. A heavy, invisible electric current zipped violently between us. More importantly, I realized she wasn't a fragile Southern spy. She was a hardened survivor of a completely different kind of war. That night, the awkward feast ended in total silence, paving the dark way for a much worse nightmare to unfold. Chapter 5. That night, sleep completely abandoned me. My large bedroom felt way too hot. Because the mating bond violently demanded I go to her, my skin practically crawled. I paced the hard stone floor like a caged beast, back and forth, back and forth. But then, a terrible sound froze me entirely. A muffled, agonizing gasp echoed quietly through the thick stone walls. Without thinking, my body moved on instinct. I threw open my heavy oak door. I sprinted barefoot down the freezing, dark corridor. The icy draft bit sharply at my bare chest, but I truly didn't care. In the span of a breath, I tracked her sweet blackberry scent to a dark, hidden alcove near the library. What I saw completely shattered my cold heart. Lyra was curled tightly into a tiny ball on the hard floor. She was violently clawing at her own chest. Her breath came in short, jagged wheezes. Ah! Ah! As the truth unraveled, I realized she wasn't crying. She was fighting. Something inside her shifted aggressively. Because the ancient mating bond actively pulls a shifter's inner wolf to the surface, her body was currently at war. She was desperately trying to keep her own beast locked away. Why? What monstrous thing lived inside this quiet girl? Just like that, my fierce protective instincts completely took over. Because I couldn't stand her pain, I dropped heavily to my knees beside her. "Lyra," I whispered softly, keeping my rough voice as gentle as possible. Before the words left her lips, she let out a strangled, breathless whimper. As if pulled by a string, I reached out. I gently grabbed her small, trembling wrist to stop her from tearing her own skin. Her skin felt like burning fire against my icy, scarred hands. The moment our skin touched, a massive shockwave of pure energy exploded between us. Zing. The wild panic in her silver eyes slightly dimmed. My physical touch was actually grounding her frantic wolf. Her breath caught, slowly evening out. "Don't!" she choked out, her voice barely a rough whisper. "Please, don't touch me." Between them, something cracked loudly in my chest. She looked at my severely scarred hands with total terror. She pulled away from me like I was a diseased animal. Deep down, I knew the bitter truth. She saw the monster. She felt my broken, ruined soul through the bond. I was a terrifying warlord, and I was making her panic even worse. Slowly, I pulled my hands back. I retreated into the dark shadows. I completely hated myself in that exact moment. Have you ever felt so utterly useless you wanted the ground to swallow you whole? As the echo faded, I watched her carefully wrap her arms around her own knees, rocking silently in the dark. By the time the early sun peeked over the jagged mountains, I made a very dangerous, permanent decision to keep her close anyway. Chapter 6. Come morning, the cold courtyard buzzed with angry whispers. The Southern Guards were packing their black carriages. They were totally eager to return to their warm, sunny lands. Yet, They were leaving entirely without Lyra. I marched aggressively out into the freezing snow. My thick fur cloak billowed wildly behind me. I stopped right in front of the smug Southern captain. "Leave," I growled, letting my alpha aura roll over him like a heavy boulder. "Your tribute is accepted. You are no longer welcome on northern soil. Go." Under the weight of my stare, the captain visibly paled. He swallowed hard. "Yes, Alpha Frost," he stammered quickly. He packed his bags. He mounted his horse. He fled my territory. As they rode away, I felt a strange, deep relief wash over me. The enemy was finally gone. But the true danger was still locked safely inside my keep. Next, I walked purposefully back inside. I climbed the winding stone stairs to the drafty guest tower. Because Lyra was my fated mate, I absolutely refused to let her freeze in that isolated room. I pushed her thin wooden door open. She sat totally still by the frosty window, watching the carriages leave. She looked so incredibly alone. "Pack your things," I commanded softly. Without warning, her small shoulders tensed. "Are you throwing me out?" she asked quietly. Instead of yelling, I took a very slow, careful step forward. "No, you are moving. You will take the chambers directly adjacent to mine." Her silver eyes widened in sudden alarm. "Why?" Because I couldn't tell her the honest truth about the bond, I lied. "Security. The outer towers are too easily breached. I need you where my personal guards can see you." Still, she didn't argue. She simply grabbed her small, worn canvas bag. She followed me down the long, torch-lit hallway. With every step he took, I felt her anxiety spiking through the invisible tether connecting us. We arrived at the heavy, ornate door next to my own bedroom. I pushed it wide open. A massive fireplace roared warmly. Thick furs covered a large, comfortable bed. It was the safest, warmest room in the entire fortress. As the silence stretched, she stepped nervously over the wooden threshold. In that moment, I formally locked myself into this dangerous war. By dismissing her guards and moving her into my personal inner sanctum, I took full responsibility for her fragile life. If the South demanded her back, they would have to kill me first. I stepped back out into the hall. I slowly closed the heavy door between us. As if fate demanded it, I leaned my tired back against the cold stone wall. I closed my eyes tightly. Through the thick stone, my sensitive werewolf hearing picked up the steady, rhythmic sound of her beating heart. Thump, thump, thump. While my pulse raced, I realized my lonely, peaceful misery was officially over. As the bond pulsed deeply in my veins, I listened to her heartbeat, knowing our brutal war had just shifted directly into my own bedroom. Chapter 7. The humid, earthy smell of the hidden glass houses instantly fogged my scarred vision. Deep down, she knew the truth. This was my only real sanctuary. Because the thick stone walls of my fortress were entirely frozen, I desperately needed to thaw her out. From there, I led Lyra past massive blooming vines. The warm air felt incredibly heavy. Have you ever watched a tiny trapped bird desperately beat its delicate wings against a thick iron cage? I saw that exact same panic in a young rogue wolf years ago. He literally chewed off his own paw just to escape my father's heavy iron snare. That rogue died bleeding in the snow, terrified of his own shadow. Lyra looked exactly like that terrified rogue right now. Because I wanted to see her relax, I pointed toward a beautiful indoor waterfall. Instead, she completely froze. Without warning, her shattered silver eyes locked onto a tall, polished silver mirror, leaning against the far wall. In that moment, her breathing hitched violently. Ah! She didn't just look away. She forcefully threw her hands over her face. She practically scrambled backwards into the dirty soil. What followed was a heartbreaking display of pure, agonizing terror. She was violently rejecting her own reflection. Because of that, I immediately stepped directly in front of the smooth glass. I used my massive body to completely block her view. I saw her fear. I felt her pain. I tasted her dark secret. As the silence stretched, she slowly peeked out from behind her shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking painfully. Truth be told, it completely baffled me. I was the hideous, ruined monster. I was the one who absolutely hated mirrors. Why was this perfectly beautiful woman so terrified of her own pretty face? What exactly was she hiding beneath her own skin? I wouldn't find out the terrifying truth until it almost got us both killed. Even so, I gently offered her my scarred hand. She didn't take it. Yet, the raw vulnerability in the humid air shifted something deep inside my chest. I realized brute strength couldn't fix her deeply broken mind. Moments later, a loud ringing sound shattered the quiet peace. Clang, clang, clang. As the wind shifted outside, the heavy warning bell from the training yard screamed urgently, which meant my brutal soldiers were tearing each other apart again, dragging us right back into the violent reality of the keep. Chapter 8. Blood and sweat stained the muddy, frozen training yard. As if summoned, my inner wolf snarled aggressively at the absolute chaos. Two of my largest warriors were brutally tearing at each other's throats. Because I demanded strict discipline, I angrily stomped out into the freezing mud. At the same time, Lyra quietly trailed behind me. She stayed hidden in the dark shadows of the tall weapon racks. "Stand down!" I roared, a deafening, commanding alpha boom. Despite that, the larger warrior blindly swung a heavy iron training axe. He missed his target completely. To make things worse, the heavy axe slipped right out of his bloody grip. It spun wildly through the cold air. Whoosh! 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 It flew directly toward Lyra's fragile head. Before I could move, my heart completely stopped. Have you ever tried to catch a falling knife in the dark? You simply can't. Without thinking, I lunged forward violently. I was too slow. But then, the most impossible thing happened. In the span of a breath, Lyra didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She didn't cower. Rather, she gracefully dropped her center of gravity. She shifted her small weight with blinding, terrifying speed. Swoosh. The deadly iron axe missed her nose by a single inch. It loudly smashed into the stone wall behind her. Crack. Her body moved on instinct. It was perfect, lethal alpha-level speed. Because nobody normal moves that fast, my jaw practically hit the freezing mud. Who taught this quiet, meek girl to move exactly like a trained assassin? Just like that, she realized what she had done. Her wide eyes filled with total panic. She instantly shrank back into a tiny, trembling ball, desperately pretending to be weak again. Because I needed answers, I quickly cornered her against the cold stone wall. With every step he took, she backed away. The moment our eyes locked, my wolf roared loudly in my skull. Mine! The mating bond violently flared, demanding I claim her right here in the bloody mud. Her sweet blackberry scent completely intoxicated my angry senses. Between one breath and the next, I reached for her trembling neck. I wanted her. I feared her. I needed her. As the truth unraveled, I saw the raw, unshed tears in her terrified eyes. I suddenly realized I was becoming the exact monster she feared. I quickly backed away, terrified of my own savage lack of control. Because of that close call, I ordered everyone back to their posts, unknowingly leading us straight into a deadly trap waiting just outside our very walls. Chapter 9. Cold dread washed heavily down my spine as we inspected the outer perimeter. The jagged northern wastes stretched endlessly before us. Because the Southern Army loved dirty tricks, I constantly sniffed the biting wind. Suddenly, a strange, metallic scent hit the back of my throat. Black powder. Before either could speak, the steep, snowy cliff above us loudly groaned. Rumble. Without warning, a massive southern explosive trap detonated. Boom! As the sky darkened with falling debris, a terrifying avalanche of crushed ice and giant boulders cascaded directly toward us. Run! I bellowed, pushing my soldiers violently out of the way. Next, I saw a tiny, terrified wolf pup frozen in the direct path of the falling rocks. Because a true alpha is a shield for his pack, I didn't even think twice. I aggressively dove right over the whimpering pup. I braced my large body for the deadly impact. I vividly remember taking a vicious beating from my younger brother when we were just kids. It hurt, but this was 1,000 times worse. A massive chunk of heavy mountain slammed brutally into my scarred back. Crunch! In that moment, agonizing pain exploded through my entire body. I was completely pinned to the frozen ground. Blood instantly filled my mouth. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Through the thick, choking dust, I weakly opened my eyes. I expected Lyra to be running far, far away. Instead, she ran directly toward the deadly danger. As if pulled by a string, she dropped to her knees right beside me. Her small hands forcefully gripped the massive, crushing boulder. Because human arms cannot lift 2 tons of solid rock, I tried to yell at her to run. But then, she let out a furious, guttural growl. Grrr. Between us, something cracked. Her slender muscles physically bulged. Her shattered silver eyes suddenly flashed a brilliant, terrifying gold, the true color of a dominant, deadly alpha predator. With a single glance, I finally saw the beast hiding inside her. With incredible, unnatural strength, she violently heaved the massive boulder entirely off my broken back. Crash! As her wolf stirred, she stood tall over my bleeding body, breathing heavily like a wild animal. Because of this shocking display, I finally understood the terrifying truth. She wasn't just a fragile tribute bride, she was a deadly, ticking time bomb waiting to absolutely destroy everything. And she was completely mine. As the heavy snow settled over my bleeding wounds, I stared up at the beautiful monster who just saved my life, realizing our dangerous new reality had just truly begun. Chapter 10. Burning fever chewed through my veins like angry fire. Blood soaked my heavy fur blankets entirely. I blindly refused the frantic pack healer. Have you ever felt so much shame you wanted to hide in the dark forever? I have. Because I looked exactly like a butchered animal, I locked my bedroom door. Without warning, a soft, familiar click echoed through the dark room. Lyra slipped quietly through the adjoining door. She carried a steaming bowl of crushed herbs and clean water. Her sweet blackberry scent instantly overpowered the harsh smell of my blood. Because I was way too weak to yell, I just closed my heavy eyes. "Go away," I groaned, my voice a pathetic, wet rasp. Instead, she walked right up to my large bed. She knelt down gently beside me. Her delicate hands carefully pulled the ruined, bloody blankets away from my mangled back. When I was a terrified young boy, my mother used to sing while tending my scraped knees. It always made the stinging pain vanish completely. Lyra didn't sing at all. Yet the total silence between us felt incredibly loud. It felt deeply safe. What followed was pure, terrifying torture. She dipped a clean cloth into the warm water. Slowly, she washed the fresh, jagged cuts crossing over my old, hideous burn scars. "You shouldn't look at this," I whispered thickly. "I am ugly. I am broken. I am a monster." As the silence stretched, her soft fingers traced the very edge of a deep scar. Zing! A massive shockwave of pure fire exploded straight through my chest. Because the mating bond quickly recognized her gentle touch, my inner wolf howled wildly. He didn't want to hide anymore. He wanted to claim her right now. "You are not a monster," she murmured softly, her warm breath ghosting over my bare shoulder. "You are a thick shield." In that moment, the electric tension in the room thickened aggressively. My heavy breathing matched hers perfectly. I turned my head slightly, catching her shattered silver eyes in the dim candlelight. The space between us burned very hot. Desire pooled extremely low in my gut. Before the words left her lips, she leaned down. Her soft, pink lips gently brushed against my bruised collarbone. As fire bloomed beneath my skin, my entire body rigidly locked. Because I had starved for 10 long years, her simple, innocent kiss tasted like absolute heaven. I wanted to pull her into my bed. I wanted to map every inch of her pale skin. I wanted to make her scream my name forever. But then, A strange, metallic smell drifted into the room through the thick window cracks. Black powder, wet iron, southern poison. Why did she carry the faint smell of a dead king? Why did that specific poison smell so horribly familiar? At the same time, the heavy glass window violently exploded inward. Crash! A massive flurry of black-clad assassins poured into my secure sanctuary, directly shattering our perfect, tender moment into a million bloody pieces and forcing us into a brutal fight for our lives. Chapter 11. Shattered glass rained down like deadly, glittering hail. 3 southern assassins stalked aggressively into my cold bedroom. Their long, curved silver blades caught the flickering, dim firelight. Because my massive body was entirely ruined by fever, I could barely sit up straight. "Kill the Alpha!" the lead assassin hissed coldly. "Take the quiet girl alive!" Before either could speak, the largest killer lunged right at my throat. Without thinking, I violently swung my heavy arm to block the deadly strike. Slice! The sharp silver blade bit deeply into my bare forearm. I let out a guttural, choked growl. Grrrl! I bled for my pack. I suffered for my land. I burned for my sins. But I absolutely refused to die in this bed. As the tension broke, I quickly tried to push Lyra safely behind my large back. Instead, she aggressively pushed past my arms. What followed was the most terrifying, beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. She stood directly between my broken body and the 3 armed killers. "Don't touch him!" Lyra screamed loudly. Between one breath and the next, a horrifying, bone-cracking sound echoed through the room. Snap, crunch. As her wolf stirred, her fragile human cage completely shattered open. 10 years of agonizing suppression violently exploded into the open air. Have you ever watched a devastating hurricane form right in front of your eyes? That was Lyra tonight. Because the heavy mating bond demanded she protect her mate, she couldn't hide her true nature anymore. In the span of a breath, thick, shimmering silver fur erupted across her pale skin. Her small frame forcefully expanded into a massive, towering alpha wolf. She was absolutely gigantic. Her eyes blazed a brilliant, unnatural gold. Before the killers could even blink, she lunged, a blur of silver fur and deadly fury. She clamped her massive jaws directly onto the first assassin's neck. Crunch. He dropped instantly. The second killer swung his blade wildly at her side. She dodged with blinding speed, swiping her razor-sharp claws deeply across his chest. Blood sprayed the stone walls heavily. Moments later, the third assassin scrambled backward in total terror. He stared blindly at the massive silver beast standing protectively over my bed. It can't be," the dying man gasped out, thick blood bubbling on his lips. Lyra Blackwood, the lost heir. As the truth unraveled, my sick heart completely stopped beating. Blackwood. That was the royal Southern bloodline, the true ruling family that was supposedly slaughtered 10 long years ago. Which meant my quiet, meek bride wasn't just a simple political pawn. She was the rightful, undisputed Queen of the South. Her giant wolf let out a deafening, triumphant roar that violently shook the very foundation of the keep. Roar. Then, the sheer agony of shifting after a decade violently hit her nerves. As if pulled by a string, the massive silver beast collapsed heavily onto the wooden floor. She shifted violently back into her human form, convulsing wildly in a pool of fresh blood. Because the true war had finally revealed its ugly face, I dragged my bleeding body out of bed to catch her, knowing our dangerous secret would definitely start a terrifying bloodbath very soon. Chapter 12. Blood pooled stickily beneath my bare knees. I forcefully pulled Lyra's convulsing, naked body directly against my feverish chest. She was violently burning up. Because shifting after 10 years of severe suppression literally fries a shifter's nervous system, she was practically dying right in my arms. "Stay with me," I pleaded roughly, my deep voice cracking with raw panic. "Lyra, breathe." I quickly grabbed a heavy fur blanket from the floor. I wrapped it securely around her trembling shoulders. I rocked her back and forth in the dark, bloody room. Years ago, I found a tiny bird with a completely broken wing in the deep snow. I stayed awake for 3 straight days trying to keep it warm, but it still died alone. I would definitely not let Lyra die tonight. Eventually, her violent shaking slowed down. Her breathing steadied into soft, ragged gasps. As the wind shifted outside the broken window, she weakly opened her silver eyes. They were totally filled with fresh, hot tears. "They know," she choked out, her voice a broken whisper. "I ruined everything. I'm so incredibly sorry." "Who are you?" I asked softly, gently wiping a streak of dark blood from her pale cheek. In the quiet that followed, she finally told me the horrifying truth. "I am Lyra Blackwood," she confessed miserably. 10 years ago, the Southern usurpers slaughtered my parents. They murdered my pack, they stole my home. Because I was very small, I hid in the floorboards. I suppressed my inner beast to survive. I became a silent ghost. As the silence stretched, sheer, unadulterated fury boiled in my icy veins. My enemies didn't just burn my lands, they butchered her family. They stole her crown. They forced my beautiful mate to live in a silent, agonizing cage for a decade. Not only that, the usurpers sent her here hoping I would kill her for them. Because of that sick betrayal, my war just changed completely. It wasn't about holding territory anymore. It was deeply, violently personal. "I will have to run," Lyra whispered sadly, trying to pull away from my chest. "If I stay here, they will bring a massive army. They will absolutely destroy your pack." Instead, I tightened my strong arms securely around her. I held her firmly against my beating heart. The moment our eyes locked, I let my dominant alpha power roll over her like a warm, protective blanket. "You are not running," I growled fiercely. "You are my true mate. You are a northern wolf now. Let them come. I will drown them in their own blood." With every heartbeat, the heavy tension broke. She buried her crying face heavily in my scarred neck. She finally surrendered completely to the heavy bond. I breathed in her sweet blackberry scent, knowing I would gladly burn the whole world down to keep her totally safe. But then, a frantic, loud banging echoed loudly at my heavy oak door. "Alpha!" Thorn yelled urgently from the hallway. "Border runners just arrived. We have a massive problem." As the bond pulsed, I gently kissed the top of Lyra's head, stepping directly away from the bloody comfort of my room to finally face the terrifying consequences of our hidden truth. Chapter 13. Heavy oak doors splintered inwards. Thorn burst into my blood-stained bedroom, his chest heaving with exhaustion. His sharp eyes immediately locked onto the dead assassins. Then, they dropped to Lyra, who was curled tightly in my arms beneath the heavy fur blanket. Because panic makes wolves reckless, Thorn's jaw tightened visibly. "We have a massive problem, Alpha," Thorn gasped out, running a blood-stained hand through his short, dark hair. "The Southern Border Patrol just intercepted an encrypted royal broadcast. They aren't just sending small assassination squads anymore. Have you ever watched an unstoppable forest fire sweep rapidly across a dry valley? That was exactly what was coming for us." Without thinking, I gently set Lyra down among the warm furs. I pulled on my heavy leather tunic, wincing as the fresh stitches in my back pulled taut. "Speak, Thorn," I commanded, my voice dripping with cold, dead iron. "The usurpers know she's here," Thorn reported grimly, glancing sideways at Lyra. "They mobilized 3 full battalions. They're marching north through the Ashen Hollows right now. And, Alpha, there's something else. Something worse." What followed was a silence so heavy it felt physically suffocating. As the tension broke, Lyra sat up abruptly. The blanket slipped down her pale shoulders. Her shattered silver eyes widened in sudden, stark terror. "Who is it?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling violently. "Your brother," Thorn said quietly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Elias Blackwood isn't dead. He's leading the Southern vanguard, and he's swearing to burn this entire fortress to the ground to drag his sister back in chains. As the truth unraveled, my sick heart completely stopped beating. Her brother? The brother she thought was slaughtered a decade ago was actually alive, and he was currently serving as the chief enforcer for the very monsters who butchered their family. Because of that brutal betrayal, Lyra let out a heartbreaking, shattered sob. In the span of a breath, I crossed the room. I pulled her trembling body back against my chest, shielding her from the cruel world. "He's not your brother anymore," I growled fiercely into her silver hair. "He's just another enemy standing between us." By the time Thorn quietly closed the door, I knew our defensive war was officially over. We had to take the fight directly to them. Chapter 14. The war room smelled heavily of cold steel, stale sweat, and burning pine logs. Around the massive oak table, my senior war council stared grimly at the large, hand-drawn map of the northern wastes. Because caution had kept us alive for 10 years, my elders immediately argued for retreat. "We must abandon the Obsidian Keep," an older wolf named Gareth urged, slamming his heavy fist against the wooden table. "We take the pups deep into the frozen mountains. We cannot fight 3 southern battalions with our current numbers, Alpha. Have you ever tried to hold back a tidal wave with a broken wooden fence?" That's what listening to them felt like. Without warning, I slammed both palms onto the table. The heavy wood groaned loudly under my weight. "No," I growled, letting my dominant alpha presence flood the cold room. "We do not run. We do not hide anymore." As the silence stretched, my warriors stared up at me in absolute shock. They weren't used to hearing their defensive alpha talk about taking the offensive. Next, I turned my head slowly toward Lyra. She stood quietly in the dark corner of the war room, her shoulders held high. Her inner wolf was finally resting, but the fierce royal fire in her silver eyes burned brighter than ever. "Lyra is not a fugitive hiding in my shadow," I announced loudly to the entire council, making my voice echo off the stone walls. "She is the true, rightful heir to the Southern throne, and I am officially claiming her as my mate and as the Luna of the Northern Wastes." More importantly, I looked directly at Thorn. "If the South wants a war, we will give them a war they will never forget. We strike first. We hit their supply lines before they even cross the frozen river." Truth be told, it was a terrifyingly bold gamble. If we failed, the pack would be completely wiped out. Yet, as Lyra met my gaze across the room, a fierce, wicked smile touched the corners of her lips. She stepped out of the shadows. She walked right up to my side, planting her small hand firmly over mine. "My brother thinks I am still a cowering child hiding in the floorboards," Lyra said, her voice ringing with deadly royal authority. "Let's go show him how wrong he is." With every heartbeat, the room shifted. My warriors didn't look scared anymore. They looked hungry. By the time the war council ended, our defensive hesitation was completely gone, replaced by a cold, unified bloodlust. Chapter 15. The midnight wind screamed violently through the frozen pines of the southern border. Thick snow muffled our footsteps as our elite strike team crept silently toward the enemy's main supply cache. Because the southern troops were arrogant, they had only left a small, lazy guard unit to watch their winter rations. Without warning, I signaled with a sharp flick of my hand. In the span of a breath, Lyra moved like a silent ghost. No hesitation, no fear, just pure, dormant alpha predator instinct finally unleashed. She slipped past the 2 outer sentries before they could even draw their breath. 2 quick, muffled thuds later, the guards hit the snow, unconscious and completely neutralized. What followed was an absolute rush of pure adrenaline. We moved swiftly through the tents, planting black powder charges against every single crate of weapons and food. Have you ever watched a whole year vanish in a single flash of bright orange fire? That was the exact plan tonight. As I secured the final charge, a sudden twig snapped sharply behind me in the dark. Well, well, well! A smooth, chillingly familiar voice mocked from the shadows. "Look what the freezing wind dragged in, a mangled northern mutt playing house with a dead girl." My blood instantly turned to ice. Before I could turn around, a heavy, silver-plated blade pressed firmly against my bare throat. Out of the shadows stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man with ice-blue eyes and a chillingly familiar face. Elias Blackwood. He looked startlingly like Lyra, except his eyes were completely devoid of warmth, coated in a thick, ruthless layer of ambition. "Elias," a fragile, breathless voice whispered from the darkness. Lyra stepped into the moonlight, her hands shaking as she stared directly at the brother she hadn't seen in 10 agonizing years. "Hello, little sister," Elias smiled coldly, tightening his blade against my neck. "I told the usurper I'd bring your head back on a spike. Looks like I get to kill your dirty northern mutt first." As the bond pulsed painfully in my chest, I didn't look at Elias. I kept my eyes locked on Lyra, waiting to see if her family ties would break her, or if her new northern pack would win. Chapter 16. Cold steel pressed against my warm skin. Elias smiled, a cruel, sharp expression that mirrored the southern snow. "Have you ever watched your entire world shrink down to the edge of a blade?" I have. Because I refused to show weakness, I stared right into his icy blue eyes. "Let him go, Elias," Lyra screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. Without warning, dozens of southern archers stepped out from the dark, snow-covered pine trees. Their bows were pulled tight, their iron-tipped arrows pointed directly at our chests. Instead of backing down, my inner wolf snarled violently beneath my skin. Grrr! What followed was a swift, brutal ambush. Before I could shift, heavy silver chains flew through the air. They wrapped tightly around my arms, burning my flesh like white-hot coals. Silver was poison to our kind. It sucked the strength right out of my bones. "Drop to your knees, northern mutt," Elias mocked, kicking the back of my leg hard. My legs buckled. I hit the frozen dirt with a loud thud. Blood pooled around my knees. Moments later, they grabbed Lyra, too. She thrashed and fought like a wildcat, but silver cuffs snapped onto her wrists, instantly suppressing her magnificent wolf. Her golden eyes faded back to a defeated silver. "You always were too soft, sister," Elias sneered, grabbing her by her dark hair. "The usurper wants you alive, but he didn't say anything about your cute little pet here." As the bond pulsed painfully in my chest, I felt her terror ripping through our mental tether. It hurt worse than the silver chains. More importantly, our daring raid had completely backfired. The supply cache wasn't destroyed, it was a trap. We walked right into it with our eyes wide open. By the time the Southern Guards forced us onto our feet, the cold reality sank deep into my gut. We had lost. That bridged us directly into the darkest night of our lives. Chapter 17. The iron cage on the back of the Southern transport wagon rattled loudly. The freezing wind whipped through the bars, biting cruelly at our bloodied skin. Have you ever felt hope slowly drain out of you like water from a cracked bucket? I watched it happen in Lyra's empty eyes. Because the silver cuffs completely drained her magic, she slumped against the cold metal bars, shivering violently. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over again, her voice barely a breath. "This is all my fault." "Stop," I growled softly, ignoring the searing pain in my wrists. "You survived. We are still breathing." Yet, truth be told, breathing felt completely pointless right now. Suddenly, a bright orange glow lit up the distant northern horizon. My heart skipped a violent beat. What was that? As the wind shifted, the faint sound of war horns drifted across the snow. Not our horns. Southern horns. What's worse, a thick plume of black smoke billowed high into the dark sky. The Obsidian Keep. They were burning my home. They were slaughtering my pack. While the forest held its breath, I stared in horror at the burning mountainside. Because I was locked in a cage, I couldn't protect my people. I failed them again. Just like I failed my family a decade ago. "Look at your precious home burn, Alpha," Elias laughed coldly from his horse riding beside the wagon. Your pack is dead, your fortress is dust, and you are going to watch it all turn to ash. In that moment, a dark, heavy despair settled over my soul. The enemy hadn't just defeated us, they utterly crushed us. As the transport wagon rumbled heavily toward the southern capital, my mind spiraled into a bottomless pit of absolute darkness. This led us straight to the edge of the abyss. Chapter 18. Deep down, I knew the cruel truth. I was a monster who destroyed everything I touched. We were thrown roughly into the cold, damp dungeons of the Ashen Hollows. Stone walls oozed with slimy green moss. The air smelled of rotting straw, old blood, and total despair. Have you ever been so utterly broken that even your own shadow feels like a stranger? That was me tonight. Because the heavy iron shackles locked us to the wet stone floor, we couldn't even reach out to touch each other. Lyra sat in the far corner of the dark cell. Her knees were pulled up to her chest. She stared blankly at the stone wall, completely silent. Her inner wolf was totally dormant, buried under layers of thick, unbreakable silver. "Lyra," I called out softly, my voice cracking in the dark. She didn't answer. She didn't even blink. The silence roared loudly in my ears. It was a suffocating, dead silence. What followed was the worst kind of torture. The quiet realization that we had completely failed. My pack was gone. Her crown was stolen. Our lives were about to end on a public executioner's block at sunrise. As the shadows danced across the damp walls, my self-loathing consumed me entirely. The core emotional question echoed painfully inside my skull. Am I a monster who destroys everything I touch, or a shield that can finally keep someone safe? Today, the answer was crystal clear. Because I was a total failure, I was nothing more than a broken shield. I lowered my head against the cold stone floor, letting the tears mix with the dirt. Before the morning light could break our final day, all hope vanished completely from the dark room. Chapter 19. Darkness wrapped tightly around my cold bones. Have you ever felt your heart completely stop beating while you are still awake? I have. Because I was locked in a damp stone cell, I thought my story ended in the dirt. Instead, a faint sound scraped against the floorboards outside our cell door. Scrape. Scrape. Without warning, a familiar scent cut straight through the rotting straw and old blood. Pine needles, burned wood, fresh sweat, thorn. Moments later, a shadowy figure slipped out of the dark ventilation grate. It was Thorn, covered in soot. Chapter 20. Thorn jammed the heavy iron pick into the lock of our cell door. Click. The rusty mechanism popped open. Soon after, I shoved the heavy door back. I rushed immediately to Lyra's side. I dropped to my knees, gently grabbing her cold, silver-cuffed wrists. "Lyra," I murmured, my voice shaking with raw emotion. "Look at me. My pack survived. We are not beaten yet." Have you ever seen a dead star suddenly spark back to life in the night sky? That was Lyra's silver eyes right then. As the bond pulsed strongly between us, her frozen expression cracked. She blinked slowly, drawing in a deep, shaking breath. Her inner wolf stirred aggressively beneath the heavy silver cuffs, demanding freedom. "They are executing us at sunrise," Lyra whispered, her voice rough and cracked. "Elias has the entire plaza surrounded." Because we knew the layout of the Ashen Hollows better than anyone else, I smiled a cold, dangerous smile. "Let him pack the plaza. We are going to crash his party." Meanwhile, Thorn handed me a heavy steel broadsword he smuggled in. "The remaining northern warriors are waiting in the catacombs beneath the city," Thorn said grimly. "We hit them from the shadows, Alpha. All or nothing." With every heartbeat, my self-doubt completely evaporated. I wasn't a monster who destroyed everything. I was an Alpha protecting his queen. That led us straight to the underground warpath. Chapter 21. Shadows danced wildly across the wet stone walls of the underground aqueducts. We moved swiftly through the dark, cold tunnels, guided only by the sound of rushing water and our burning adrenaline. Because the guards above were busy preparing the public execution stage, the catacombs were entirely deserted. I walked closely beside Lyra, holding her hand tightly. The silver cuffs still bound her wrists, sealing her wolf away for now, but her human strength and royal fire were burning hotter than ever. Moments later, we reached the heavy iron grate leading directly up into the central execution plaza. Above us, the loud, arrogant roar of the southern crowd echoed through the thick metal bars. Drums beat a slow, terrifying rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Eventually, we caught the scent of wood smoke and royal banners. The execution block was just a few feet above our heads. I paused, turning to look at my mate in the dim torchlight. I gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her pale forehead. "When I push this grate open," I whispered softly, "we unleash absolute hell." Lyra's silver eyes flashed with a lethal, beautiful fury. She nodded tightly. As the heavy iron grate began to creak upward, the final high-stakes battle of our lives loomed directly overhead, ready to explode. Chapter 22. Heavy iron grates flew into the air with a deafening screech. Without warning, our northern warriors exploded out of the underground catacombs and straight into the bright, sunny execution plaza. Gasps echoed through the massive crowd of southern citizens. Elias turned around in total shock, his face drained completely of color. "Kill them!" Elias screamed, his voice cracking with sudden panic. Because our enemies were completely unprepared, total chaos erupted instantly. Steel clashed against steel. Shouts and roars filled the crisp morning air. I charged forward like a freight train. I locked my eyes directly on the usurper Alpha sitting high on the velvet throne. "This ends today, coward!" I roared, swinging my heavy broadsword. Clang! Sparks flew everywhere. The usurper blocked my strike, sneering behind a mask of cruel arrogance. Meanwhile, a heavy southern guard lunged at Lyra, pinning her against the wooden execution block. "Stay back, monster!" the guard snarled. Because the heavy silver cuffs still bound her wrists, Lyra couldn't shift into her wolf. But she didn't need to. In that moment, she let out a fierce, royal roar. She channeled every ounce of her suppressed alpha blood, driving her booted heel straight into the guard's chest. Crack! He flew backward into the dirt. With a violent, guttural scream, she slammed her chained wrists hard against the sharp iron edge of the execution block. Clank! The silver shackles shattered into a million pieces. As if pulled by a string, her golden eyes flashed blindingly bright. Her magnificent silver wolf burst out into the world, letting loose a triumphant howl that shook the sky. "Awoo!" At the same time, I put all my weight into one final devastating strike. I swept my sword hard, slicing straight through the usurper's defenses. He dropped to his knees with a wet gasp, defeated. Before the dust could settle, I pivoted sharply. I strode across the blood-stained plaza. Elias tried to run, but Thorn blocked his path with a heavy battle axe. I grabbed Elias by his expensive silk collar. I threw him roughly to the ground right at Lyra's feet. "He's all yours," I breathed heavily, stepping back to let the true queen claim her justice. Chapter 23. The deafening roar of battle slowly faded into a tense, heavy silence. Surviving Southern soldiers dropped their weapons to the stone floor. One by one, they bared their necks, bowing deeply to the true heir. I staggered backward against the stone steps of the throne. The adrenaline drained completely from my body, leaving behind a sharp, burning agony in my old wounds. I slid down, sitting heavily in the dust and blood. Have you ever felt so completely empty and exhausted that breathing hurt? That was me right now. Several wealthy southern elders rushed forward, holding out a heavy, glittering golden crown toward Lyra. "Your Majesty," an elder stammered nervously. "The throne is yours." Instead of taking the crown, Lyra didn't even look at it. Her golden eyes shifted back to warm, human silver. She turned her back completely on the glittering throne and the bowing elders. Without another word, she ran straight through the crowd. She dropped hard onto her knees right beside me in the dirt. "Kaelen," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her small hands gently cupped my bloodied face. "You're bleeding." Because I was completely safe in her arms, I let out a soft, tired chuckle. I've taken worse hits from a snowdrift. What followed was pure, quiet relief. She ripped a strip of clean linen from her own dress. She carefully wrapped it around my bleeding shoulder, pressing her forehead softly against mine. The bond pulsed warmly between us, no longer screaming with panic or hidden fear, but humming a steady, peaceful song of absolute victory. "I didn't come back for a crown," Lyra whispered fiercely, looking deep into my eyes. "I came back for my home. And my mate." As the warm spring wind blew across the plaza, I pulled her tightly against my scarred chest, knowing we had finally won our forever. Chapter 24. Months later, the warm spring air carried the sweet scent of blooming pines across the fully rebuilt Obsidian Keep. The northern and southern territories were officially united under one banner of peace and equality. Tonight, the grand banquet hall buzzed with cheerful laughter, clinking crystal glasses, and bright music. I stood quietly near the towering stone fireplace. I wore a formal black tunic, but I left the high collar wide open. I didn't hide my facial scars anymore. I didn't hide my jagged burns. They weren't branding marks of failure anymore. They were the hard-earned badges of a survivor who protected his pack. Across the crowded, glittering room, my eyes found her. Lyra stood gracefully in the center of the hall. She wore a stunning gown woven from silver silk, glowing with absolute royal confidence. She wasn't the cowering girl hiding in the floorboards anymore. She was a fierce, beloved, and formidable queen. As if summoned by my gaze, she looked up. The moment our eyes locked, a soft, loving smile bloomed across her face. She excused herself from the foreign diplomats, gliding effortlessly across the stone floor toward me. The music slowed down into a gentle, romantic waltz. She stepped right into my open arms, resting her small hands securely against my chest. "Penny for your thoughts, my fierce alpha," she teased softly, her silver eyes sparkling with pure joy. I gently wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her impossibly close. "I was just thinking," I murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. The mating bond really was a gift from the goddess after all, and just like that, the dark, haunting question that once kept me awake every single night finally vanished into the warm air. Am I a monster who destroys everything I touch, or a shield that can finally keep someone safe? I wasn't a monster, I was her shield. And together, we had built an unbreakable sanctuary that would last an entire lifetime. The end.